Hi everybody, this is Sam Yen. I'm the Chief Design Officer for SAP and the Managing Director for SAP Silicon Valley. We're doing a series of podcasts around design-led innovation. And in this podcast, we're going to talk about customer stories. It's all about the customer. For the last 5 years or so, SAP has taken our design thinking approach, and we've had multiple engagements with customers. In fact, it's been over 500 engagements that we've had with different clients over the last 4 or 5 years. We've created an external design agency that offers these design services with organizations. So for this podcast, I'm going to share a handful of stories to illustrate the breadth of how design thinking has helped our customers. The first example is actually a very typical example where we bring design thinking as a way to help customers at a very strategic level get a handle on the vision of their digital transformation. The first example is with a very famous fashion, apparel, and retailer. And what we wanted to do at a very senior executive level is make sure that there was a vision for what the digital transformation actually meant for them as an entire company. So taking design thinking as a methodology, we suggest a typical approach. We do something called Remember the Future. And for Remember the Future, we want executives from different lines of business to imagine what success looks like in the future. There's a slight twist to this. The name of the exercise is called Remember the Future because if you want to imagine your future 5 years from now, you actually go 10 years into the future and remember back 5 years to the point where you were successful. And again, from a psychological perspective, there's a real important reason for doing this because it's very hard to imagine. There's so many different ways to get to the future that it's very difficult for people to pick one of the future potential paths to get to a certain point. But when you're looking at the past and you're recounting a time from the past, you have to be very concrete. So it makes it much easier for somebody to actually tell the story of success and tell how they got there because they're talking about it from a past perspective. So anyway, there's this technique called Remembering the Future. And this is something that we do together with our customers. So in this example, we created a story about what the future success of this company would look like. But we told the story not from the perspective of the company, but we told the perspective from the perspective of the consumer of the company's products. So we created a protagonist of what a day in the life of what this person would be. And we went through all the potential touch points that this person's journey was with that product. It started off with how this person woke up and heard about advertising through different medium. It went through different aspects of their personal life. If they ran in the morning or they participated in races, what were other opportunities that this company had to be able to be part of that experience as well. It talked about omni-channel and the ability to purchase things, whether they're looking at things from a phone or going into a store or going not into a retail store, but going into a wholesale scenario where somebody else is actually selling your product. And the great thing about this is because you're taking things from the perspective of the consumer, it allowed the different lines of business to be able to share that vision in a way that didn't bring their own baggage, right? If you're only talking about the future from your perspective, there's silos that you've established and things that you want to protect and make sure that your organization is sustained going forward. But if you take the perspective of the end user, you're able to paint a vision that goes across different organizations. And that becomes the rallying point, that becomes the shared vision across the entire organization. And from that point, you're able to work your way back. And you're able to say, okay, in order to be able to provide that end user experience, that vision of an end user experience that we all agreed upon across all our different lines of business, this is what we need to do to change our business model. This is what we need to do to potentially restructure our organization. This is what we need from a technology perspective to be able to do that, right? So that's a typical example, and from that, it was a long process. But we had a much more strategic conversation in terms of the entire account and building up a particular deal. And that deal actually ended up in a very, very large deal as opposed to just a point deal. And not only did it end up with a very large deal, but it ended up with a roadmap of things that we would follow up on from year to year to year as well. So that's one example. Another example, which is something that we could actually share the customer name, is the example of Daimler and AMG. So AMG is the race car division of Daimler. And it started off as a simple co-innovation project where we just helped improve the user experience of a mobile app that they had internally. It wasn't just the output that we created a solution with a great user experience, but they liked the process that we went through. This design thinking methodology that brought together different stakeholders. We took a step back, understood what the real needs were. So they liked that process. And we did another project. And this other project was a little bit more strategic because it involved some other people a little higher up in the chain. And over the course of the year, we did a number of projects to the point where we finally ended up doing a very strategic project where we ended up, again, bringing in different heads of different lines of business where we helped AMG actually reimagine the entire process of going from concept to showroom and how they could streamline that process, a process that took literally many, many years to dramatically decrease the amount of time it took for that. But again, it was the credibility of doing that design thinking user-centered process, bringing together stakeholders and seeing results. And as we did more of these projects, the deal became more and more strategic to the point where we had the executive leadership team of AMG together to do that. Now, Daimler is the parent company of AMG. And when they saw some of the success of design thinking within AMG, what Daimler wanted to do was they wanted to take that to the next level and scale that also across Daimler. And the important thing about Daimler was it wasn't about the projects themselves, but with Daimler, they really wanted SAP to come in and show how we could teach them to teach their own organization how to bring a culture of innovation. So this was about creating a center of excellence for design thinking within Daimler. They didn't call it design thinking, but nonetheless, it was the same methodologies, the same philosophies to drive a culture of innovation. And they really drew on the lessons learned from SAP. And this was really interesting as well. They thought that the management wouldn't be able to go to a Silicon Valley company and just piggyback off of what works in Silicon Valley because Daimler is a German company with a certain history, of a certain hierarchy. And they especially wanted to hear from SAP because we were a German company and they saw SAP as very similar in terms of the history of SAP, the hierarchy of the organization, the global reach of the organization. And they wanted to take our lessons learned and really bring that into Daimler. So that was an example of bringing in our best practices, not only to help them with their solutions and their products, but also to help them transform their innovation culture. One example that we shared on stage a couple years ago that we talk about all the time is the digital boardroom. The digital boardroom actually came out of a design thinking co-innovation process together with Colgate. So the story of the digital boardroom is something which I don't think is actually very well known within SAP, but it started off with a conversation a number of years ago between Hasso and Ian Cook, who is the chairman and CEO of Colgate. And this happened at Sapphire, and this was in the early days of HANA. And Hasso was telling Ian Cook about all the great capabilities of HANA, the technical capabilities of HANA, and his vision that with this, as chairman of SAP, he had this vision that he had all the information, he could have all the information of SAP at his fingertips, and hopefully that could help really inform the business decisions that he could make as a chairman of SAP. And he talked about the difficulties of the board meeting and how difficult it was to get information necessary to really make data-driven decisions at a board level. So Ian was intrigued. We didn't have a product at the time, but what Hasso said was, Ian, if you bring your leadership team and do a design thinking workshop with us, maybe together we could define what this product might look like. So Ian brought the 20 top executives of Colgate to SAP here in Silicon Valley. They spent a weekend here. And they went through a process where they articulated what the challenges were from making executive level board decisions at Colgate. And SAP showed the art of the possible when it came to what HANA did and how HANA has been applied in different domains. And together, we came out with the blueprints of what would later become the boardroom of the future, or what is now called the digital boardroom. The final example that I actually personally like to talk about and share often is an example of the Cancer Institute in Heidelberg. I really like to share this example because our mission statement is really to help businesses run better. But a couple of years ago, Bill inserted the phrase "and improve people's lives." And this is actually an example where design thinking actually helps improve and actually saves people's lives. So the story of cervical cancer screening in Kenya is that cervical cancer is actually the leading cause of cancer death in females in Kenya. Right. So one project was to help prevent this was to introduce aid workers in Kenya and do cervical cancer screening. And there was some technology around that in terms of collecting information, which then would be sent back to Heidelberg into this Cancer Institute, and they would analyze the information to help do preventative measures to increase the efficacy of the screening and thereby save people's lives. Well, it turns out the efficacy rate wasn't that great. So we were asked to bring design thinking into that scenario. And when we brought people that actually went down to Kenya, and we did deep empathy work. We followed the screeners, the aid workers around. We understood kind of the conditions in which they worked. And what we found out was it was a combination of things. There was certainly some technology that we were able to introduce. We were able to introduce the SAP Cloud Platform as a way to bring information and synchronize information and bring that information back in real time to the people in Heidelberg to analyze the information. But we also found that the training of the technology, how do you actually deploy the technology, how the technology has to be used in the conditions of rural Kenya, was also something that could be improved. So it was a beautiful story of understanding what the actual need is, defining, again, finding the right problem to solve by understanding the context in which the aid workers had to work and how technology was introduced into that type of environment. And making some improvements when it came to those processes, that training, that educational process, and also by introducing the technology, SAP Cloud Platform, we were actually really able to dramatically improve the efficacy of the cancer screening, thereby actually saving people's lives. So I love to use that example because it's not only helping organizations and businesses run better, but improving people's lives, and in this case, actually saving people's lives. So those are just a couple of the stories that I tend to talk about when people ask, how does design thinking, how have you actually helped customers with design thinking? So in the case of Colgate, it was to co-innovate on a product that actually helps businesses run better at the most senior executive strategic level. In the case of Daimler, it was helping organizations build their own competencies to bring about a culture of innovation based on SAP's expertise and our learnings over the years. In the case of the anonymous fashion retailer, this is a very senior strategic strategy to help create a vision for digital transformation and for SAP to be part of that conversation so that we are a strategic partner with them and not just a technology provider for them. And of course, in the last case, really a case where we're improving people's lives.